sound is not so good, just signal in order that we can adapt as we go along. But it's my great pleasure to welcome you all today. I suggested to Marion that in a venue like this it might be more appropriate if we started the day with a glass of champagne, but she didn't think that was such a good idea, so I think we'll be sticking with coffee again next year. But it's a great venue to come to, and I understand how busy you are in your schools at this time of the year, but I also know that getting out and attending these functions is important for you in terms of getting the job done. So thank you for making the effort to be here today. We've got a number of new first-time attendees, quite a significant number of those, so I'm not going to list them all, but I particularly welcome those people. And in welcoming you, I also would like to acknowledge that this meeting is being held on Aboriginal land, and I recognise the strength and capacity of Aboriginal people. It's my great pleasure to introduce the Hon James Merlino, the Deputy Premier and the Minister for Education. And we feel as if we've been quite fortunate that the Deputy Premier has made himself available on a number of occasions for different VASSP activities. But just talking to people this morning, I also understand that he's been getting out and about and going to various schools. So, James, we really appreciate the fact that you are such an actively involved Minister for Education. So I welcome you to the podium. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Judy. Good morning, everyone. I try and get out on the road as much as possible, and it's the best part of my job. So thank you for inviting me here today. I'd also like to begin by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the land in which we're gathered and pay my respects to elders past and present. And it's a great opportunity for me, almost 12 months, not yet 12 months for my government. It'll be 12 months at the end of November, but it's been a busy year, and hopefully you're feeling some of that optimism and momentum in regards to education in our state. So thank you for the warm welcome, Judy, and it's great to address you at the Second Victorian Association of State Secondary School Principals statewide general meeting for 2015. I wanted to start by just acknowledging the really great working relationship between myself and my office and VASSP. It's an important relationship, and both in terms of broad brush policy discussions and the direction of education in our state, looking at a number of conversations around the education state in the first 6-9 months of this year, but also in the specifics. So we're at a regional VASSP meeting, and I was talking about capital, and then a number of principals raised their hands concerned about the asset management planning process, the capital process. And I took those concerns away with me. We then had a follow-up meeting with Judy and a couple of principals to talk about from a principal's perspective their concerns with the process. Following on from that, we made some immediate improvements to the template, the paperwork around Gateway 2 to make it a bit more efficient, a bit simpler. So we made some immediate changes, and we're also undertaking a broader review of asset management planning. So I understand there was a meeting between the department and VASSP yesterday, and there'll be consultations with VASSP over the course of over the next few months. So I just wanted to give you that specific example that when you raise a concern, we do follow it up and work in an open and frank and honest manner with VASSP. So I just wanted to say to particularly all the new members here for the first time, the government values our working relationship with VASSP. I also want to acknowledge that there's probably a few of you who are at the briefing yesterday on the education state. So I'm sorry if I repeat a few things today that I said yesterday, but repetition's a great learning tool. But I do apologise for those that have heard some of this before. It's an exciting time for Victoria as we embark on a series of landmark reforms, marking a significant step in building Victoria as the education state. These reforms reflect the government's election commitments and build on consultations that many of you have participated in throughout the course of the year. We've heard the message loud and clear Our schools are good. Our schools are very good. Our system is very good, but we can and we need to make them better. The vision for the education state is pretty straightforward. It's about creating a system that improves outcomes for every student, in every classroom, in every school. A system where all genuinely does mean all, where we set equally high expectations for our most capable students, our most disadvantaged students, our most vulnerable students, and where all of us have a role to play in the success we create for our students. It means that we give every child the education they need for their future, irrespective of their background and circumstance. So we've taken the first steps, if you like. We know what we need to do. The next step is about how we do it, how we can help our kids to learn, our principals to lead, and our teachers to teach. We've got three overarching drivers: a focus on equity, a focus on stronger system-wide capability and support, and a focus on evidence-informed school improvement. Each of these drivers must be pursued relentlessly and in a focused way, underpinned by clear priorities, and I'll talk about them in a moment, to ensure we're making the greatest possible impact on student outcomes. Each and every one of us have a role to play, and many of you have one of the most significant roles of all as the principals of your schools. You'll have heard a lot about the government's injection of funding into our schools. This is a large and important investment that I'll say more about in a moment. But the starting point about the education state is not about funding or resources. The starting point is our aspiration and ambition to significantly lift student outcomes. And so we're setting our sights higher than ever before, with ambitious and innovative targets that redefine the success of our schools. And that's, in a sense, the most important thing that a politician can do, that a minister and a government can do, is to actually set the aspiration, set the targets. Where do we want to be in 5 years' time? Where do we want to be in 10 years' time? First, we want to establish an education state which prioritises learning for life. But we need to expand our horizons beyond literacy, numeracy and science. They're there and we've set ambitious targets for them, but we need to do more than just that. We need to aim to equip our students with the attributes that they'll need to thrive in work and life. Critical thinking, creativity, resilience. We also want our kids to be healthy, happy and resilient, as I said, so they become well-rounded young adults. This means building resilience and encouraging more physical activity in our kids to promote positive growth. And finally, some of the most ambitious targets we're setting for our schools will be to break the link between disadvantage and outcomes. If we needed another reminder, there was the Mitchell Institute report reported in The Age a week or two ago, and again showing that connection between disadvantage and poor outcomes, particularly where there's concentrations of disadvantage. So we want to halve the proportion of students leaving school each year. We can't be the education state if 10,000 young people drop out of our education system completely each and every year. 10,000 kids. Now we've made a target to halve that, and it was reported that a principal said that that's a pipe dream. But my response to my cabinet colleagues, my response to each and every one of you, what's the alternative? You know, we're not going to reform if we don't set targets, if we don't set aspiration about where we want to be. So what's the alternative? We don't set a target, or we set mediocre targets, or we set targets that we can easily achieve. The only option for us, if we are genuine about ensuring that we have a leap forward in student outcomes, the only option for us is to set ambitious targets that will be hard to get to, but that we can get to. And finally, we want to increase community confidence and pride in our government schools, ensuring that every community has access to a great public school. In setting and pursuing these targets, our government's committed to providing quality education to all Victorians, regardless of where they live. We're injecting more funding into our schools to make sure that this ambition can be achieved. We know that providing high quality education costs more for some students who have additional needs, and in some parts of Victoria where there is entrenched disadvantage. So we're significantly increasing the amount of funding that is targeted towards disadvantaged students in all schools, delivering more money to where it's needed most and drastically reducing the impact of disadvantage on outcomes. And we've made a fundamental shift in how we address disadvantage by developing a better model for targeting students with high levels of need. One of the most significant reforms is the addition, and this is both nation-leading and world-leading, the addition of a new catch-up loading targeted at secondary students who have not met the minimum benchmarks in Year 5 and as such are likely to start secondary school at a disadvantage to their peers. In fact, you can make the assumption that if they start behind in Year 7, they will still be behind in Year 9, Year 11, right through to their end of schooling. So Andrew's going to go through it in more detail, but this is a reform I'm really proud of and I think will make a big difference. Each student who qualifies to catch up will receive $2,000 per year for the duration of their secondary schooling. And this will make an important difference to some 9,500 students each year. By reforming how we direct equity funding, we're delivering more money to the system and directing it to where it's needed most. Taken together, these reforms represent a 70% increase in needs-based funding in Victorian government schools, a 70% increase. The best jurisdictions, the leading jurisdictions in the world, directly allocate about 10% of school funding targeted at disadvantage. We've been running at about 4%. This gets us up to around 7%. So we're not quite where we need to be, but it is a massive jump to what we've had over many years. And importantly, for principals from rural and regional Victoria, on a per student basis, students in rural and regional Victoria are receiving double the amount that students in Metro Melbourne are. Again, a reflection of how we need to better target disadvantage. But the single most important thing we can do to improve outcomes for Victorian students through schools is to improve the quality of teaching in every classroom. The Education State is about giving our teachers and principals the support that they need to focus on quality, to focus on the learning growth of every single student. One of the major initiatives we've announced is spending over $21 million on the professional development for teachers so that they've got the best skills and the best methods to teach the curriculum of the future. Victorian students need a curriculum that teaches them skills for life, that industries will need and employers will expect them to have. As I said, skills like critical thinking and creativity and problem solving, as well as the fundamentals. The new curriculum supports this. It includes a strengthened approach to coding, to STEM and critical thinking, to literacy, music, health education, personal and social capability, including respectful relationships, financial literacy, civic participation and ethical understanding. Professional learning for teachers will be in place for curriculum planning, assessment and reporting, and support will also be available online. The other key component of, if you want to look at the two things that make the biggest difference, capital's important, and we need to make sure that we've got a strong capital program delivering new facilities that promote and allow for the very best of team teaching and collaboration. But the two things that make the biggest difference, it's the quality of teaching and its leadership. So for schools to deliver a great education, schools need great leadership. And the principles here today exemplify that. The Education State school reforms recognise the importance of strong leadership within schools. Great leaders are dedicated to their own professional development and that of their teachers, focused on seeing improvement from every student and dedicated to fostering a lifelong love of education. We've announced initiatives to identify and nurture great school leaders, for training principals and for increasing collaboration between principals to ensure the best practice and knowledge is shared throughout our system. This is based on the strong evidence about the positive impact of expert school leadership and professional collaboration across systems. However, we're currently, and I couldn't believe this when I came into the job last November, early December, got the formal briefing from the department. We currently train only half the number of principals that we need to. And that's only to meet the replacement needs, let alone attracting a really strong field of applicants for each principal vacancy. And so we've invested over $12 million over the next 4 years for new and expanded leadership development programs. The Local Leaders program will employ 200 principals and assistant principals with the leadership skills needed to train and develop up to 1,300 high potential teachers in their schools. The principal preparation program will be expanded from 80 to 160 places so that aspiring principals have the opportunity to gain experience and guidance under high-performing principals. The Expert Leaders program is a mentoring network that will boost collaboration among schools. The program will engage 80 experienced principals to share insights and practices and support other schools across our state. We'll also be placing a strong focus on the most vulnerable students in our education system. As I said before, Victoria has way too many people, young people, disengaging early from education. This disengagement carries high costs both for our society and for the students themselves. These reforms will significantly disrupt this pattern by providing additional support for vulnerable kids at high risk of disengagement and poor performance. We'll do more for the children in the care of the state, and we'll leverage our network of community service organisations to help students to re-engage with the school system. So I spoke about the importance of great leadership. Feedback from the education state consultations is clear. After recent years, and this is the message I got in the more than 2.5 years that I was Shadow Minister for Education, school principals felt isolated and abandoned and no longer felt part of our great education system. And all too often the innovations in our system were hidden away when we really should be sharing that success so that it becomes the success that's guaranteed for all. So the education state will invest over $82 million over the next 4 years for more support to principals and schools at the local level. This will include the creation of 17 new areas within the current 4 regions in the Department of Education and Training's organisation, lining it up with the Department of Health and Human Services. Multidisciplinary teams will be created to join up services in local areas for the benefit of schools and their community. An extra 150 staff will be employed in these new teams in regional offices to ensure that you have the support you need when you need it. So the funding we've recently announced is significant, but it's the education state is more about funding reform. It's what we do in our schools each and every day to make the biggest positive impact for students that we can. It's about the decisions we make, the interventions we choose, how well we implement them, and how we evaluate whether they're making the difference that we're expected them to. Some of the challenges we're facing in our system are really stubborn ones, and it hasn't just been, over the previous 4 years where there were significant cuts to education, $1 billion out of the education budget, double that when you count the impact of the cuts to TAFE. It's not just about the last 4 years. We're talking about more than a decade that we haven't had the improvements that we expected to. So we're going to have to do a few things differently. We need to draw from our existing expertise and learn from within, while putting students at the heart of everything we do. To help schools focus their school improvement activities, the framework for improving student outcomes has been developed to galvanise our collective effort towards those few priorities that are going to make the biggest difference in school improvement. And I'll finish on this point. So we've set 4 priorities: excellence in teaching and learning, professional leadership, creating positive climates for learning, and community engagement in learning. And associated with those priorities, schools will be focusing across the system on 6 evidence-based initiatives that we know will have the highest impact when implemented faithfully and with intensity. So those 6 initiatives are curriculum planning and assessment, building practice excellence, building leadership teams, empowering students and building school pride, setting expectations and promoting inclusion, and building communities. And what I think is really powerful about the education state reforms that we outlined in the last week of term 3. So it's a massive increase, $566 million directly to our Victorian government schools, directly to your school budgets. Plus, in total, it's $747 million. So it's $566 million of extra revenue, in addition to normal enrolment and indexation. This is additional money. So the additional resources, the 150 staff and much better support, no longer ringing up and not having someone at the other end of the phone when you're calling a region. Senior education improvement leaders that will have a genuine partnership and relationship with 25 schools, not 50 or 60. So funding, regional support, ambitious targets, and then the final point about the priorities and the initiatives. Every single one of our 1,528 government schools must, as part of their annual implementation plan for 2016 and their strategic thinking beyond that, must choose at least one of those 6 initiatives. So that's what reform's all about. It's not about doing 100 things satisfactorily. It's about doing 3, 4 or 5 things exceptionally well. And all the evidence shows that it's these things, particularly the things around leadership and quality of teaching, that will make the biggest difference in our schools. So can I thank you for having me here this morning? Can I thank you for the collaboration, the positive cooperation between the government and VASSP, the VPA, principal networks. You are the leaders on the ground, and I want to make sure that we've got an excellent relationship. I want to hear when things aren't working. We can't fix everything in the first month or first 6 months or the first year, so there's more things we need to do. We've got the EBA negotiations next year. We're looking at workforce issues, how we can. I want to have a good look at career progression, how we can improve retaining and attracting staff in difficult to staff areas of our state. So there's a lot more things we need to do. Jenny McCarkos is doing a lot of work around early years reform, so hopefully you'll see that in the budget next year. I'm doing a lot of work around capital, so there might be some questions around capital. But I just wanted to give you a sense today that in less than 12 months we've done a hell of a lot together, and it's a really exciting time for education in our state. Thank you very much, and it gives me great pleasure to officially declare open the 2015 Annual General Meeting. Thanks very much.
James, I wonder if we had one question, because we love to ask questions.
Yeah, absolutely.
And
more
just,
than one.
Just in terms of time, we might, we'll see how we go. Does anyone have a question that's pressing for the Minister while he's here? Just a little bit of thinking. Oh, yes.
Thanks for all your work, Minister. I think you're really hitting the mark in so many areas, and I know that there's a great improvement in the spirit of the way things are going in education. But I do have one question, especially in terms of increasing retention rates. The previous administration reduced VCAL funding. They whipped out a great slab of money. Our school has a large VCAL program. That's made it more difficult to offer the appropriate courses that are going to engage students at risk and keep them at school. Is there any plan to restore that VCAL funding and perhaps even increase VET funding to keep these programs going? Thank you.
Thanks. So there's a couple of responses to that. This kind of falls into the bucket of waves of reform and other things that we're looking at. So 2 things that are happening. One is the review of your SRP, school budgets, and that's a review conducted by Steve Bracks, the former Premier. I didn't mention that before. So what we've delivered is, in our very first budget, our election commitments, and in addition to that, we had to find the absent Gonski funding, and we realised that was $850 million or $1.4 billion over the forward estimates, just to deliver the state's obligation. This isn't federal funding, this is the state's obligation to Gonski for 15, 16 and 17. So it was how much could we do in our very first budget? So it was about delivering the election commitments, camp sports and excursions, partnership with Food Bank for breakfast clubs, partnership with State Schools Relief for uniforms and books and stationery. So we delivered our election commitments. We delivered, which is something that a new government doesn't necessarily, your first budget's about implementing what you promised. We have to do that, plus find the missing Gonski funding. What we've done then is we've got Steve Brax conducting a review into school budgets, and this will inform us in terms of decisions we'll make beyond the 2017 school year. So all of those issues will be looked at through Brax's funding. In addition to that, in terms of vetting schools and TAFE, so the cuts to TAFE had a direct impact on the costs of VCAL vetting schools program in our secondary schools. So there's the McKenzie review into our TAFE system, and we'll be receiving that review as a government towards the end of this year. So I don't have an immediate positive answer in terms of VCAL coordination, but we've significantly boosted budgets. We've got the Brax review and we've got the McKenzie review. Yep.
Minister, welcome. Thank you for the work of your government. I think those of us who've been around a while have seen changes of government, and it's been really pleasing to see this government move quickly into its work. You did seem ready to go. I have a question around that issue of retention and completion, highlighted by the recent Mitchell Institute report. Does government see that as the work of all schools or of the government sector? And if the answer is that it's the work of all schools, what does the government see as being the role of non-government schools in addressing that issue?
It's a good question. It's the right answer is it's a responsibility of every school right across our state, across government, Catholic and independent. So that's the answer. In terms of how we deliver that, I can't say too much now, but I had a chat with Steve a couple of days ago, just some of the ideas that are coming through the review. Steve's going to look at not just SRP, but look at school funding and make some recommendations in terms of needs-based funding and how that's allocated to our non-government system. I can't say much more because I haven't yet received that report. It's just framing a few ideas. So we'll get the report, we'll get some recommendations. We'll spend next year considering those recommendations, and then we'll make some further reform. There's also the opportunity we made some changes to the legislation for the first time. There's a formal process to discuss these matters with the Ministerial Advisory Council and representatives of both of government, independent, Catholic schools. So there's avenues to look at these issues, but it's everyone's responsibility. But we do know, and this was outlined in the Gonski report, and we know it to be true, looking at the work of each and every government school in our system, the vast bulk of the work is on our government school system. But with the Navigator funding and also with the Outlook funding, it's funding directly associated with our most vulnerable kids. So the Navigator funding is around engaging with those kids that are disengaged with our schools. And there's some great individual examples. There's hands-on learning in Frankston, there's the Brotherhood of St Lawrence, there's the Smith family, there's Melbourne City Mission, and they've each got individual partnerships with schools. We want to create those opportunities across our system. And then the Outlook funding is a direct program specifically targeted at our 6,000 kids in out-of-home care. So there will be teams of people led by principals in our regions across the state, directly responsible for each and every child. For the first time ever, we'll have effectively the pushy parent for those kids in out-of-home care. So we're quite serious about addressing this, but it shouldn't be something that is the sole responsibility or task of our government schools.
Thanks. James. I think time might have caught up with us. So I would like to thank you for that. For those of us, which includes everybody in this room, we have spent our whole lives, our whole professional lives, working in the best interest of students in Victoria. So it's inspirational for us to have a minister who shares that passion for education. So thank you very much for your time this morning.